At some point, you stop believing it's just stress. You've done the elimination diets, you've cut out gluten, dairy, caffeine, you've taken probiotics, tried the low FODMAP, done the gut healing supplements, and your symptoms are still there, still unpredictable, still running your life. And every doctor you have seen has looked at your labs and told you everything's fine. Here's what nobody told you. There's a category of gut destruction that conventional medicine does not test for. They don't screen for it, and in most cases, they don't even talk about it. And I see it consistently in women who've been stuck with unresolved gut symptoms for years. It's mold and the toxins it produces inside your body. And I'm going to show you exactly how much mold exposure destroys the gut environment, why it never shows up on a standard test, what it consistently triggers in women who've been exposed, and what it actually looks like when someone finally finds the right tests and finds it. By the end of this video, you're going to understand something that your GI doctor has probably never even mentioned to you. You know how the logic goes. The colonoscopy was clear, blood work normal, stool test came back negative, so the tests were run, the results are fine, and nothing's wrong. What nobody explains is what those tests were actually looking for, and more importantly, what they were never designed to find. A colonoscopy looks at the structure of your colon. It finds polyps, inflammation that's visible to the naked eye, ulcers, bleeding. What it cannot do is tell you anything about the living environment inside your gut, the bacterial balance, the yeast load, immune function, the integrity of your gut lining at a cellular level. None of that shows up on a camera. Standard blood work was not designed to detect mold toxins that are circulating in your system. A basic stool test was not built to measure mycotoxin exposure or the downstream damage it causes to the gut microbiome. Clean results mean that the tests found nothing. They do not mean that nothing is there. Normal is not a finding. Normal is the limit of what got tested. And when it comes to mold and mycotoxins, the limit of what gets tested in a standard GI workup is essentially 0. Most people think of mold exposure as a respiratory problem. Black mold, water-damaged buildings, air quality. What almost nobody talks about is what happens inside the gut after you've been exposed. And this is where the story gets important. Mycotoxins, the toxic compounds that mold produces, are not just inhaled, they're ingested through contaminated food, water, and air. And once they're inside the body, the gut takes a direct hit. Here's the sequence I see over and over again in my clients. Mycotoxins are aggressive antifungals by nature. They're produced by mold specifically to compete with and destroy other microorganisms. When they're present in your gut, they do not discriminate. They start killing off your beneficial bacterial species that hold the entire gut ecosystem together, the keystone bacteria that produce butyrate, that feed the cells lining in your colon, that keep that single cell thick barrier intact. Gone, depleted, or severely compromised. When those beneficial species are wiped out, the gut becomes a vacancy, and vacancies get filled. This is where the co-infections come in. Candida and other opportunistic yeast species move in very aggressively because the bacterial competition that was keeping them in check has been eliminated. SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, develops because the microbial balance that controls bacterial populations in the small intestine has completely broken down. Parasites take hold more easily because the gut immune function, particularly the secretory IgA, has been suppressed by the mycotoxin load. Pathogenic bacterial species like Klebsiella, Proteus, and Enterococcus overgrow, and they start producing their own inflammatory toxins directly into the gut lining. And mycotoxins themselves damage the gut lining independently. They break down the tight junctions between the intestinal cells. Those microscopic gaps start opening up. Now the toxins being produced by all of those opportunistic bacterial infections have a direct route into your bloodstream. The immune system detects them, mounts a systemic inflammatory response, and that inflammation becomes its own driver of symptoms. Urgency, loose stool, cramping, bloating that never fully resolves, brain fog, fatigue. Symptoms that extend well beyond the gut sometimes because the gut barrier is no longer containing what it's supposed to contain. This is not a sensitive gut. This is a gut that has been chemically destabilized, colonized by opportunistic species, and left without the microbial foundation that it needs to function. And it's completely invisible on a colonoscopy. If you want more videos like this that actually explain what is happening inside your gut and why standard medicine keeps missing it, hit subscribe. This is exactly what this channel is here for. Your doctor has probably never asked you about mold exposure. It's not on the intake form. It's not part of the GI standard workup. In most conventional practices, it's not even on the list of possible contributing factors. But let me ask you a few questions. Have you ever lived or worked in a building with a history of water damage, flooding, or visible mold, even briefly? Did your gut symptoms start or significantly worsen after a move or a renovation, a flood, or a period of time in a very specific building? Have you ever been treated for gut symptoms repeatedly without lasting results, probiotics, antibiotics for SIBO, antifungals for Candida, and found that things improved temporarily, but they were never fully resolved? Do you have symptoms that go beyond the gut, fatigue that doesn't respond to sleep, brain fog, mood instability, joint pain, histamine reactions, symptoms that your doctors have treated as separate, unrelated problems? Have you ever been told you have SIBO, Candida, or a parasite, but the treatments only partially worked or the infections came back? If you answered yes to most of those, then mold exposure may not be the only thing happening in your gut, but it may be the reason that everything else keeps coming back. Because if the original source of the disruption, the mycotoxin load, and its downstream effect has never been identified and addressed, you are managing consequences without ever touching the cause. Here's what it actually looks like when someone finally tests for this. When I run advanced functional tests on my clients who have been stuck for years, the pattern in mold-exposed clients is pretty consistent, and it's significant. Severely depleted keystone bacterial species, the bacteria that produce our butyrate and maintain the gut lining, are often completely absent. Without butyrate, that single-cell thick gut barrier can't maintain its integrity. The tight junctions break down and everything starts leaking through. Candida and other yeast species in significant overgrowth, not trace amounts, substantial colonization in a gut environment where the bacterial competition that would normally keep these yeast populations controlled has been wiped out. Candida produces compounds called aldehydes that inflame the gut lining independently, and they create a second layer of immune activation on top of everything else already happening. SIBO markers, bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine that is driving fermentation, gas, bloating, and altered motility, is a direct consequence of the microbial imbalance that mold exposure triggered that has never been corrected. Parasitic infections more often than most people expect. A gut with depleted immune function and a compromised lining is a very hospitable environment for parasites. They move in, they stay, and they drive unpredictable, urgent diarrhea that no elimination diet is ever going to touch. Secretory IgA severely suppressed. This is the gut's frontline immune protection, its first line of defense against pathogens and toxins. Mycotoxins suppress it directly, and without adequate secretory IgA, the gut can't identify or neutralize new threats before they take hold. Every new pathogen that comes in has an easier time establishing itself. Elevated inflammatory markers like calprotectin, LPS toxins from the inflammatory bacterial species that have overgrown in the space that was left by the depleted beneficial bacteria. Every single one of those findings is measurable with the right functional testing. Every single one was invisible on every standard test that was run before, not because it wasn't there, but because no one used a tool that was designed to look for it. And critically, none of it will fully resolve if the mold exposure itself is still ongoing and the mycotoxin burden has not yet been addressed. You can treat the SIBO and it's going to come back. You can clear the candida and it's going to come back because the conditions that allowed all of it to take hold in the first place haven't changed. That's why treatment without testing is always temporary. And it's why testing without testing for the right things leaves the root cause completely untouched. So where do we go from here? When the right testing maps what's actually inside your gut, and when the mold piece gets factored into the picture, a targeted protocol becomes possible. Not a generic gut healing protocol, not another round of probiotics aimed at symptoms, a plan built around what your gut specifically contains and what specifically caused it. Women who have cycled through SIBO treatments, candida protocols, elimination diets for years start getting results that actually hold, not because they tried harder, but because they finally had the right information. So you have two options tonight. Think back through your history and ask yourself honestly, have I ever lived or worked somewhere with water damage, flooding, or mold? Did my symptoms start or change after a specific environment that I was in? Write it down. That timeline might be the most important clinical clue that you've never given to a doctor. Or call your doctor tomorrow and ask one question. Have you ever tested me for mycotoxin exposure or assessed whether mold could be contributing to my gut symptoms? Just listen to their answer. If they don't know what you're talking about, and they probably won't, then you know exactly what has never been looked for. But either way, by tomorrow, you'll know whether this piece of the picture has ever even been considered. And if it has not, now you know why it actually matters. You are not someone with an unexplainable gut. You're someone whose gut has never been properly explained. The tests that came back normal were looking at the wrong things. Mold exposure and mycotoxins are not fringe theories. They're a measurable, documented, and consistently overlooked driver of gut dysfunction. And I see the evidence in the functional testing that I do every single day. That is not the end of your story. It's just where the right testing can start. If this helped you understand why your gut symptoms may have never fully resolved, watch this next video because it covers what conventional testing leaves out and what advanced functional testing consistently finds instead. It's linked right here on the screen.